Security, remove him now. This deal closes today.
Freeze the transaction, effective immediately.
The bank stopped all $840 million.
At 10 on Thursday morning, every production line at Keystone Motion Systems went silent. Most of Keystone's 340 employees filled the central assembly hall, while teams at 2 satellite plants watched through wall-mounted screens. Behind Claire Whitmore, a blue slide read, "A New Chapter for Keystone." Only the executive team knew that at 3:30 that afternoon, Sterling Ridge Partners was scheduled to release the first funds in an $840 million acquisition. Near the back stood Malcolm Reed in a charcoal work jacket, holding a worn inspection notebook. His badge said Equipment Reliability Consultant. Nothing on it suggested he had helped design Keystone's first systems, that his late wife had written material standards still used on the floor, or that he controlled enough voting power to stop the sale. Claire called him forward. "Effective immediately," she said. "Keystone is ending Mr. Reed's consulting agreement." She listed the reasons in measured corporate language: unauthorized access to records, interference in management decisions, repeated challenges to executive authority, and conduct that made several female leaders feel threatened. Malcolm did not argue. "What exactly did I say that was threatening?" Claire's expression tightened. "This is not a courtroom. I didn't ask for a courtroom. I asked for the words." The hall went still. Claire glanced toward human resources. "The concern is not limited to specific language. It is also the energy you bring into executive spaces." Several black employees lowered their eyes. They knew that language. When no raised voice could be found, tone became the accusation. When tone could not be proved, presence became evidence. Aisha Grant stood from the second row. "He has never threatened anyone in quality," the HR director cut in. "Grant, sit down." Aisha held her ground for 1 second, disappointment showing in her face, then returned to her seat. Evan Miller spoke from the opposite aisle. His technical concerns were confirmed. Claire stopped him. "This meeting is not for employees drawn into a contractor's personal resentment." She faced Malcolm again. Her voice softened, making the insult sharper. "You were kept here to take care of machines. Do not confuse our tolerance with permission to question the people responsible for running this company." 2 security officers waited near the exit. They never touched Malcolm. Their position turned a termination into a public escort and a disagreement into something dangerous. Malcolm studied Claire. He saw no anger in her face, only certainty. That troubled him more. He removed his badge, placed it on the table, and closed his notebook. "Preserve the recording of this meeting," he said. Claire gave a thin smile. "Your access ends now. The record doesn't." Malcolm walked out beneath the eyes of newer employees who knew him only as a consultant, and longtime workers who understood more but had learned not to say it aloud. In the lobby, beside a cart marked for document destruction, he saw an old photograph. It showed Malcolm and Danielle beside Keystone's first working prototype, both exhausted and proud. The caption had been cut where Danielle's name once appeared. Malcolm brushed dust from the image with his thumb. For the first time that morning, emotion reached his face. Not surprise. Recognition. Outside, Pittsburgh rain hammered the metal canopy. Malcolm called Renee Carter. She answered before the second ring. "They did it," she said. Malcolm looked through the glass at the company he had helped build. "Place the trust hold." Renee checked the time. 10:15. The request would not become an active hold until the bank received and accepted Leah's notice. Once accepted, Malcolm would have 5 hours to prove his authority and show why the sale rested on false documents. Inside, Claire believed the forged consent had reduced Malcolm's voting power to a technicality, leaving him as little more than an inconvenient former contractor. Outside, the man she dismissed held enough voting power to freeze the transaction. But ownership alone would not save Keystone. Malcolm still had to prove why the company should not be sold, who had forged consent, and why the first people to see the danger were the same people Claire had worked hardest to silence. 23 years earlier, Keystone Motion Systems had been an abandoned rail warehouse on Pittsburgh's west side. Malcolm Reed and Danielle Ellis did not arrive with investors or a polished plan. They arrived with a used lathe, a tilted drafting table, Danielle's tolerance notebook, and enough stubbornness to keep working when the heat failed in January. Malcolm designed motion systems built to move with precision under heavy load. Danielle, a materials engineer with no tolerance for shortcuts, developed the surface treatment that let their components survive thousands of operating cycles without warping. Their first months were measured in small victories: a bearing that held, a prototype that returned to center, a customer who paid on time. Some nights they slept on folding chairs because driving home made less sense than running one more test. Danielle marked every flaw with a red grease pencil. Malcolm joked that one red line from her could stop an entire production run. She barely smiled. Stopping a line is cheaper than explaining why we saw the risk and let it pass. That sentence became Keystone's unwritten law. 6 years before Claire fired him, Danielle died after a long illness. Malcolm kept running Keystone for another year. From the outside, he looked disciplined. Inside, he had turned work into a room where grief could not follow him. He stayed late because numbers were easier than absence. Eventually, he understood he was no longer leading the company. He was hiding inside it. Malcolm created the Reed Family Stewardship Trust, placed 58% of Keystone's voting power inside it, and named himself sole trustee. Maya, his adult daughter, became the beneficiary, but she could not sell the shares while Malcolm controlled the trust. 5 years earlier, the board hired Claire Whitmore as CEO. At first, the choice looked right. Claire expanded the customer network, rebuilt sales, secured financing for a second facility, and put Keystone on business magazine covers that had never cared who designed its first prototype. Malcolm believed she could run the company better than he could then. He left the corner office and returned 3 days a week as an equipment reliability consultant. No private office, no assistant, no mention of voting rights. He wanted to see the company without people changing their behavior around the founder. Maya believed he was doing something else. She believed he was disappearing. 3 years earlier, while working as an internal data analyst at Keystone, Maya found a pattern in promotion decisions. Black employees with performance ratings equal to their white colleagues were being removed from advancement lists at a higher rate. The reasons sounded professional but proved little. Leadership presence, cultural fit, executive readiness. Claire dismissed the report and accused Maya of bringing social issues into business data. Maya asked Malcolm to demand an independent board review. He told her they needed more evidence. He meant caution. She heard abandonment. Within a month, Maya resigned, moved to Washington, D.C., and began using her mother's last name professionally. Before leaving Pittsburgh, she said, "You keep telling people the truth does not need to shout. Sometimes you use calmness to avoid standing beside the person who has to shout alone." Malcolm never forgot it. He simply never found an answer that did not sound like an excuse. After Maya left, Claire removed Danielle's drafting table from the company history display and sent it to storage. Malcolm said nothing. He kept Danielle's tolerance notebook in his desk and the worn red grease pencil beside it. He told himself staying quiet helped him see Keystone clearly. What he failed to understand was that every step into the background gave Claire more room to decide who belonged in the company's history and who would survive only as a useful face in someone else's story. The changes came quietly, each one small enough to excuse. The photograph of Malcolm and Danielle disappeared from the lobby, replaced by Claire accepting a regional CEO award. The new employee video described Keystone as a local engineering shop transformed into a national brand under Claire Whitmore's leadership. Malcolm's name never appeared. Danielle's did not either. Her original design drawings surfaced in the anniversary campaign, labeled the innovation platform developed by today's leadership team. Malcolm watched the video once. He said nothing. Silence had become a habit he mistook for discipline. The pattern grew harder to ignore. A new security officer stopped Malcolm outside the testing lab and asked him to open his tool bag. 2 white consultants passed through the same checkpoint carrying larger cases. Neither was stopped. The next week, an executive assistant asked Malcolm where he was delivering equipment. When he said he had been invited to the operations meeting, She called facilities to verify him instead of checking the calendar on her screen. Her apology came quickly. Her first assumption stayed with him. At the quality meeting, Aisha Grant presented cold cycle test results for a new metal coating. Her voice remained even as she explained the risk of embrittlement under repeated low-temperature exposure. Claire folded her hands. "We need measured analysis," she said. "We do not need emotional reactions to preliminary data." Aisha's expression changed only around the eyes. 10 minutes later, Evan Miller restated the same concern. He suggested Keystone evaluate thermal behavior before expanding production. Claire nodded. That is how a future leader presents risk. Evan looked toward Aisha. She kept her attention on the report. After the meeting, HR added a note to Aisha's file. Communicates risk in a manner that creates unnecessary anxiety. Evan's review said, shows strong executive judgment under uncertainty. Malcolm requested an explanation. The HR director said the difference involved overall communication style. Malcolm placed both evaluations on the table. Was Aisha's data wrong? That is not the issue. Did she raise her voice? No. Did she interrupt anyone? No. Did she violate the review process? The director closed the folder. These decisions involve context, Malcolm. Context, a word broad enough to hide almost anything. 2 days later, Malcolm found a note in his own file. Can be physically intimidating in executive settings. No incident was attached, no quoted statement, no date. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and serious in meetings. He asked questions until someone answered. Those facts had been turned into a warning. That afternoon, the communications team photographed Claire for Keystone's anniversary campaign. Malcolm waited outside while technicians packed their equipment. Claire stepped into the hallway. "Your story matters to the brand," she said. A black machinist rising from an old rail warehouse. Clients respond to that. Malcolm studied her. Then why is Danielle's name gone from the history display? Claire's smile held. Lenders do not invest in memory. They invest in an image they can trust. Her eyes moved over his work jacket. Some people build the product. Other people make the market believe it has value. Do not confuse those roles. She walked away before Malcolm answered. Claire assumed the hallway was private. It was not. A wireless microphone from the photo session remained active inside the conference room. Her words entered the communications team's recording system and settled inside an unlabeled audio file. Malcolm returned to his desk, opened Danielle's tolerance notebook, and found the red grease pencil tucked into the spine. Half of it was gone. He wrote one word across a blank page, standard. He did not write prejudice. A conclusion could be denied. A pattern once measured could not. Before he accused anyone, Malcolm would prove Keystone no longer applied the same standard to every person in the room. Keystone received the returned actuator assembly on a gray Monday morning, packed in foam and sealed with Aeromed Technologies tape. The unit had locked halfway through a cold cycle acceptance test at the customer's facility. No patient had been near it. No technician had been hurt. The test used an unloaded medical table frame inside a temperature chamber. The chamber simulated winter shipping and storage, when a weakened coating could develop microscopic cracks that continued growing after the equipment returned to normal operating temperatures. The return report blamed improper customer handling. Malcolm read that line twice. Then he carried the assembly to a bench beneath white inspection lamps and removed the outer housing. The fracture sat near the drive collar, thin as a dark hair. A drop would have crushed the edge or bent the mounting face. This crack had started below the coating and traveled outward through a zone that absorbed stress every time the mechanism changed direction. This did not happen in shipping, Malcolm said. Aisha stood across from him. I know. She waited until the lab door closed, then opened a folder on the quality terminal. 6 weeks earlier, her team had found the same pattern in 2 samples from the same coating batch. The original report read, potential fatigue crack propagation after repeated cold cycle exposure. The version stored in Keystone's main system read, minor cosmetic variation with no confirmed operational impact. Her name had been removed from the approval field. Who changed it? Malcolm asked. The revision came through product strategy. I refused to sign it. And 3 days later, They moved me out of final release. She spoke without heat, but her fingers pressed hard against the desk. Someone had taken her judgment, erased her name, then used her refusal as proof that she was difficult. Malcolm closed the folder. Do not email this to me. Do not copy it anywhere. Aisha looked at him. Then how do we keep it? We preserve the parts. They followed Keystone's procedure. They photographed the failed assembly, recorded the lot number, sealed the earlier samples, entered the chain of custody, and added a second technician as witness. Once the customer hold attached to those serial numbers, no executive could remove the evidence without creating another record. Malcolm traced the coding lot through purchasing. Claire had approved the supplier 10 months earlier because its price came in nearly 20% below the previous vendor. Every shipment had passed through Northline Expedited Logistics. The invoices looked official and repetitive. Emergency handling, special repackaging, accelerated inspection. Carrier records showed ordinary ground freight on the same route. Renee Carter reviewed the payments after hours. Northline appeared under freight, consulting, and quality support, each charge small enough to escape notice alone. Together, they reached about $1.5 million. The vendor file listed no verified warehouse staff. Renee followed the registration through 2 holding companies and stopped. The beneficial owner is Nolan Whitmore, Claire's younger brother. On Saturday morning, Renee drove to the Northline address. Its website described a logistics center with loading docks, inspection bays, and secure storage. The address led to a rented mailbox in an aging commercial strip outside Pittsburgh. Behind it stood one locked warehouse door, dusty glass, and a faded for lease sign. Renee photographed the street number, mailbox label, empty loading area, and posted hours claiming hundreds of shipments had been processed there. She returned to her car and spread the invoices across the passenger seat. She checked every routing number twice, then a third time. Only after the totals matched again did she call Malcolm. He answered from the testing lab. Tell me. Renee looked through the windshield at the empty building. They are not moving freight, Malcolm. They are moving money. He glanced at the sealed, cracked assembly beside him. Claire had chosen a weaker supplier, softened a safety warning, paid her brother through a company with no real operation, and made the people who objected look like the problem. Malcolm took the first flight to Washington and reached Maya's apartment before noon. She opened the door, saw the document case in his hand, and stepped aside without smiling. No Keystone awards. On one shelf stood a picture of Danielle at the old drafting table. He noticed it. Maya made coffee, placed 2 mugs on the table, then looked at the case. What happened? Malcolm removed only the files Leah had cleared for review. Anonymized promotion records, disciplinary notes stripped of names, timestamps from the altered quality report, and comparisons showing how similar conduct had been described. Maya did not touch them. So this time you need me to prove what I told you 3 years ago? Malcolm sat across from her. He had prepared answers on the flight. None survived the question. I should have backed you then. Maya's expression stayed controlled, but pain tightened her mouth. You were not on their side. You also were not beside me. People with power like to pretend those are the same thing. Malcolm lowered his eyes. He remembered telling her to wait, gather more evidence, and trust process. Claire had heard permission. I used humility as a place to hide, he said. Maya studied him. The admission did not repair the past, but it removed the first layer of distance between them. She opened the case. I will help under 3 conditions. You do not use discrimination data only to win back control. You do not settle quietly if the pattern is real. And this cannot end with people treating you well because they discover you own the company. Malcolm nodded. Agreed. Maya worked through the afternoon. She did not build a long presentation. She built pairs. A white manager raised his voice during a budget meeting and received praise for being decisive. A black supervisor asked 3 calm questions and was marked as having an attitude. A white engineer rejected an instruction and was called independent. A black technician requested written confirmation and was labeled difficult. Notes containing words such as threatening, uncooperative, and poor cultural fit rarely quoted a sentence or named an act. Several appeared days before promotion denials or demotions. Employees who filed safety concerns appeared more often in the lowest performance category. By evening, Maya had selected 6 cases no executive could dismiss as isolated judgment. Malcolm, Aisha, and Evan were among them. Back in Pittsburgh, Evan found something else. Claire had sent the board a presentation on the coding risk. The technical analysis came from an email Malcolm had written weeks earlier. Claire removed Malcolm's name, changed the title, and listed Evan as the principal contributor. Evan brought both versions to Malcolm the next morning. "I did not take your work," he said. Malcolm compared the documents. "Did you know it was mine when they praised you for it?" Evan looked toward the factory floor. Machine cycled behind the glass, steady and indifferent. "Yes." Malcolm closed the folder. "Then decide what you do with that knowledge." Evan nodded. For the first time, he stopped thinking of himself as a witness outside the problem. In Washington, Maya continued reviewing the preserved HR archive inside a secure legal data room Leah had created. Near midnight, she found a draft termination narrative under Malcolm's employee number. It described threatening conduct during an all-company meeting and claimed several employees feared for their safety. Maya checked the metadata twice. The file had been created 3 days earlier. The meeting had not happened yet. She called Malcolm. "Claire is not preparing to respond to your behavior," she said. "She already wrote the behavior she needs you to have." Renee found Project Rivergate buried inside a budget archive labeled Facility Planning. The folder looked ordinary until she opened the first forecast. Keystone's public numbers showed shrinking margins, rising freight costs, and weak demand. The internal schedules told another story. 2 profitable contracts had been signed but kept out of the current quarter. Revenue due within weeks had been pushed into later forecasts. Payments to Northline appeared as routine operating expenses scattered across freight, inspection, and repackaging. The cheaper coding saved money on paper. Then Northline's invented service fees erased the savings and made production look more expensive than it was. Renee followed each adjustment until the pattern became clear. Claire was not selling a struggling company. She was making a healthy company look tired enough to justify a lower price. Project Rivergate also promised her a long-term CEO contract, a closing bonus, and management equity that would become more valuable after Sterling Ridge cut costs and resold part of the business. Sterling Ridge Partners had offered $840 million for control of Keystone. The sale materials described the company as burdened by old facilities, inefficient staffing, and a quality division resistant to change. Project Rivergate included plans to close 1 production area after the transaction and eliminate about 70 positions. Renee opened the staffing file. The names did not form a random cost reduction list. Longtime quality employees appeared first. So did workers who had challenged the coding supplier, people with access to historical records, and black managers who had filed complaints about promotion or discipline. Aisha's name sat near the top. Claire planned to remove the people most able to explain how Keystone had been weakened, then use their removal as proof that the company needed saving. Renee sent the files to Leah through the protected legal channel. An hour later, Leah called Malcolm and Maya into a secure video meeting. She shared a document titled Trustee Consent for Change of Control. Malcolm's signature appeared above a notary seal. He stared at it without speaking. "I never signed that." Leah already knew. The signature matched one on an old equipment financing agreement, down to a slight ink break near the final letter. The notary office had closed the previous year. The signing date placed Malcolm at a manufacturing conference in Arizona. The listed witness had left Keystone months earlier. File records showed the document had been created on a computer assigned to Claire's executive office. The original file name mattered most: Dormant Trust Authorization Draft. Claire and the seller's transaction team had told Sterling Ridge that Malcolm no longer participated in governance and had transferred voting authority to her. They supplied the disputed consent as proof and claimed he was unavailable for direct confirmation. The buyer still needed final verification because the Reed Family Stewardship Trust controlled 58% of Keystone's voting power. Without valid approval from the trust, Claire could negotiate, present, and promise, but she could not deliver control. Leah explained the next step. They could challenge the document and request a temporary hold on the transaction. The hold would not last without Malcolm appearing as trustee and showing that Sterling Ridge had received false information. Then we stop the sale, Malcolm said. Remove Claire, stabilize operations, protect the contracts. Maya looked at the workforce list on her screen. You are still treating this as someone taking something from our family? Malcolm turned toward her. Maya pointed to the names. They believed they could do this because the people who saw it had no power they respected. Aisha had the test results. Renee had the payments. The employees had their own records. None of that mattered until you appeared as the owner. Malcolm looked back at the forged consent. He understood the danger in revealing only his title. People might leave the story believing they should hesitate before humiliating a black man, because he might secretly control the company. That lesson protected powerful people. It did nothing for anyone without shares, a trust, or a board seat. Ownership can stop the transaction, he said. It cannot be the reason they were wrong. Maya's expression softened, though the distance between them did not disappear. Then prove the whole thing. Malcolm closed the sale file and opened a new one. The case would stand on 3 separate facts. Claire lacked authority to sell the trust shares. She knew the coding carries a safety risk and altered the record because money depended on silence. She applied different standards to black employees, then used the resulting labels to remove the people who challenged her. The sale was only the final move. The real plan had begun much earlier, when Claire learned she could weaken a company by deciding whose warnings counted and whose names could be erased. Claire learned about the old file access on Tuesday afternoon. By 5 o'clock, the finance department's computers were under review. Renee's permissions had been cut in half. The original testing room had been locked, and Malcolm's executive floor badge no longer worked. HR received instructions to complete his termination file before Thursday. Claire moved quickly because speed could make a decision look inevitable. She called Renee into her office the next morning. Sunlight crossed the glass desk, catching the silver frame around Claire's business award. Renee remained standing. Claire folded her hands. You have been with Keystone a long time, 21 years. Then you understand how one mistake involving confidential documents could cost someone a great deal near retirement. Renee's face stayed still. Which documents? Claire smiled faintly. I want you to understand the consequences before deciding where your loyalty belongs. Renee thought of every payroll she had protected during hard years, every supplier invoice Danielle had challenged, every employee who trusted the numbers because someone had checked them twice. My loyalty is in the ledger, she said. It does not change with the person sitting in this office. Claire's smile disappeared. Renee left knowing the remaining hours mattered more than the remaining years of her career. Downstairs, Aisha received an order to move old test samples into scrap storage. The cracked coding specimens were included. Attached was a statement describing the altered report as a routine language improvement. Signing it would have confirmed that the technical meaning had never changed. Aisha returned the statement unsigned. Claire's team had removed Aisha's final release authority, but an older customer safety rule still allowed any certified quality manager to place a temporary hold. Aisha used that remaining authority and placed the samples under a formal quality hold. A technician named Luis Moreno watched her seal the container, record the lot numbers, photograph the contents, and enter the customer reference into the shared system. Once Aeromed's project number appeared in the record, no one could destroy the samples without leaving a trail outside Claire's control. Aisha's hands trembled when she pressed submit. She had spent months being told her caution made others uncomfortable. That morning, she chose to make the truth harder to remove. Claire summoned Evan next. A statement waited on the conference table. It claimed Malcolm had pressured Evan to revise his technical conclusion and exaggerate the coding risk. Claire placed a pen beside it. I opened a leadership door for you, she said. Do not let misplaced gratitude close it. Evan read the statement once. He remembered the praise, the private lunch invitations, the board slide carrying his name over Malcolm's work. For months, he had told himself he never asked for any of it. The excuse felt thin now. He pushed the pen away. You did not open a door for me. You used me to prove it had never been closed to anyone else. Claire's eyes cooled. Think carefully. I finally am. Evan left with the unsigned statement, scanned the original presentation, attached Malcolm's email and his own account, then sent everything through Leah's protected channel. In Washington, Maya searched the preserved communications files Leah had added to the secure legal data room. She found an audio file with no title, created during Claire's photo session. The first minutes held camera directions and lighting checks. Then Claire's voice entered, clear and relaxed. She described Malcolm's story as useful to the brand, called him a black machinist from an old warehouse, and said lenders needed an image they could trust. Maya replayed it. The recording did not create the case. It connected it. Danielle's erased name. Malcolm labeled intimidating without an incident. Aisha's warning called emotional. Evan rewarded for repeating the same concern. 70 jobs aimed at people who had challenged the supplier. By Wednesday evening, Claire knew Renee had opened Project Rivergate. She persuaded Sterling Ridge, the transaction lawyers, to move the funding date from Friday afternoon to Thursday at 3:30, falsely assuring them that every closing condition had been satisfied. She scheduled an all-company meeting for 10:00 that morning. Malcolm's termination report was finished before he entered the building. It described him as threatening, disruptive, and unable to accept modern leadership. Claire no longer waited for events. She wrote them first, then arranged the room so people would mistake the script for memory. Her plan was simple: remove Malcolm in public, suspend Renee, lock the evidence, and announce the sale before anyone with the truth could reach the microphone. After Malcolm stepped into the rain, Claire moved fast. Renee's access vanished first. Security entered finance, took her computer, and sealed the file room. Aisha received a written order to surrender the cracked samples. Evan's name disappeared from the afternoon presentation team. At 10:22, every employee received the same message: do not share company records with former contractors or unauthorized third parties. Claire wanted Malcolm recast before he could speak. Outside, beneath the metal canopy, he called Renee. Place the trust hold. She stood beside a locked office. I'm suspended. Can you reach Leah? Yes, then do it now. Leah Park received the trust documents minutes later and sent formal notices to the escrow bank, Sterling Ridge Partners, Keystone's board, transaction counsel, and the product liability insurer. The notices disputed Claire's authority to sell the trust's voting interest and challenged the trustee consent. At 10:41, the bank froze the scheduled transfer. 5 hours. That was all it would grant without direct verification. Malcolm had until 3:41 to appear as trustee, establish control of the Reed Family Stewardship Trust, and show that Sterling Ridge had relied on false information. Claire answered with a conference call. She described Malcolm as a resentful former contractor who had accessed confidential material and was trying to damage the company after being dismissed. Then she turned pressure into theater. The acquisition announcement would proceed at 3:30 minutes before the planned release of funds. Employees would fill the assembly hall. Board members, Sterling Ridge executives, customers, and lenders would join by video. Claire believed a public celebration could make the transaction feel finished before the documents said it was. People found it harder to retreat once the lights were on. One problem reached her from outside the deal. Before Aisha's account was disabled, her quality hold had synchronized with Aeromed Technologies. Aeromed's quality director compared the notice with the report Keystone had supplied. The wording did not match. One version warned of fatigue crack propagation after repeated cold cycles. The other called the damage cosmetic. Aeromed suspended every related shipment and demanded access to the 3 meeting. Claire could not refuse without alarming Sterling Ridge. She could not cancel without revealing that the hold had done more than delay a bank transfer. At noon, Thomas Beckett called Leah. The board chair had compared Malcolm's original signature with the one Claire submitted. The curves matched too perfectly. Even the ink break appeared in the same place. "This is copied," Thomas said. At 12:18, he issued a directive requiring Malcolm to attend the acquisition meeting as trustee of the voting trust. Malcolm did not return with attorneys beside him or boxes of records in his arms. Leah, Maya, and the bank representative would appear through a secure video line. Renee, Aisha, and Evan remained inside Keystone, isolated in different departments, unsure whether Claire would let them speak. Malcolm drove back alone. At 2:46, he entered the lobby wearing the same charcoal work jacket Claire had used to make him look small. The receptionist saw him and stiffened. On her screen sat Claire's order denying him access. In her hand was Thomas Beckett's directive requiring his presence. She read both, then looked at Malcolm. He did not ask her to choose a side. "Follow the document with higher authority," he said. She checked the signatures twice, called the board office, and opened the gate. 14 minutes before Claire's announcement, Malcolm walked into the same assembly hall where she had fired him 5 hours earlier. The stage was ready. The cameras were on. This time, the record would begin before Claire spoke. Claire stood beneath the lights with a Sterling Ridge executive beside her, the main site workforce facing the stage, and employees at 2 satellite plants watching by video. "Keystone is entering the greatest period of growth in its history," she said. Before she could announce the sale, the central screen changed. Thomas Beckett appeared from the board office. "We must resolve 3 matters first: authority to approve the transaction, product quality, and the accuracy of information provided to the buyer." Malcolm entered through the rear doors. Claire's face tightened. This man was terminated for unauthorized access and threatening conduct. Malcolm did not mention his shares. "Show the creation time on my termination report." Maya joined through the secure line and placed the metadata on the screen. The description of Malcolm's threatening conduct at the all-company meeting had been written 3 days before the meeting occurred. A low murmur moved through the hall. Thomas invoked the board's authority, ordered security to grant the 3 protected witnesses access to the assembly floor, and directed HR not to interfere with their testimony. Leah Park appeared next. Malcolm Reed co-founded Keystone Motion Systems. He is the sole trustee of the Reed Family Stewardship Trust, which controls 58% of the company's voting power. He never transferred authority to Ms. Whitmore. The bank representative confirmed that Claire's trustee consent was disputed. Leah showed the copied signature, invalid notary seal, impossible witness date, and file history leading to the CEO's office. Sterling Ridge's counsel spoke after a short consultation. "The transaction cannot proceed while ownership authority remains under investigation." Claire turned toward Malcolm. "You left this company. I carried the difficult work while you hid in the factory. Now you appear because Keystone has value." Malcolm met her eyes. "My shares explain why you must stop. They do not explain why you should have listened. The test report does." Aisha walked forward carrying the sealed sample container and 2 versions of the report. Aeromed's quality director joined by video and confirmed the company had received a version that removed the warning about fatigue cracks. Aisha gave the date of the failed test, the conditions, the request to soften the wording, and the day Claire's team removed her release authority. Claire called her history of concern excessive. Malcolm asked 5 questions. Which number did Aisha report incorrectly? Which test procedure did she violate? When did she raise her voice or threaten anyone? Why was Evan praised for repeating the same warning? Why was the report changed after Aisha refused to sign it? No answer came. Evan stepped onto the stage and displayed 2 emails. The technical content was nearly identical. Malcolm's version had been called negative. Evan's version had been placed in his leadership file. "I did not present it better," Evan said. "I was believed before I had to prove I belonged in the room." Renee came next with bank records, registration documents, shipment codes, approval histories, and photographs of Northline's supposed logistics center. The screen showed a rented mailbox, a locked warehouse, and a faded lease sign. She traced $1.5 million in payments to a company controlled by Nolan Whitmore that had provided no verified service. Maya then displayed 6 matched cases. Similar behavior, different racial backgrounds. different labels, different careers. White managers described as decisive, black employees described as threatening or difficult. Claire accused them of turning a commercial dispute into a racial issue. Maya looked into the camera. The data did not decide what this was. Your decisions did. The final audio file played. Claire's own voice filled the hall. His story has value to the brand, but lenders need an image they can trust. Then, some people build the product. Other people make the market believe it has value. The recording did not stand alone. It connected the erased names, altered reports, stolen credit, discipline records, and planned layoffs. Sterling Ridge announced that it would not proceed with the closing and delivered a formal termination notice later that afternoon. The bank canceled the transfer. Aeromed kept every affected shipment on hold pending independent inspection. After a brief emergency vote, the board suspended Claire, froze every payment and contract tied to Nolan, and barred Northline from Keystone Systems and facilities while investigators secured the records. Claire asked for a private resolution to protect Keystone. Malcolm's face remained calm. You used silence to make other people disappear. I will not use it to help you leave without the truth. No one applauded. Claire walked off the stage through the same aisle Malcolm had used that morning. His identity had stopped the sale. The records she believed no one important would preserve ended her control. 8 weeks later, the independent investigation ended with a report too detailed to dismiss. Northline had no operating staff, no verified freight activity, and no legitimate reason to receive $1.5 million from Keystone. Claire and Nolan had hidden their financial relationship. Claire's executive team had altered quality records and relied on a forged trust document to support the sale. The layoff list targeted people who questioned the coating supplier, preserved records, or challenged promotion and discipline decisions. Investigators also found that HR employees approved labels such as threatening, difficult, and poor cultural fit without quoting a sentence or identifying an act. The pattern fell hardest on black employees. Claire's contract was terminated for fraud, retaliation, and concealment of product risk. Every agreement tied to Nolan was canceled, and the records went to the proper authorities. 5 people who knowingly changed documents or hid payments faced discipline based on their role. Malcolm refused to treat fear and deliberate fraud as the same offense. Employees who followed bad procedures without falsifying evidence had to cooperate, retrain, and face independent review. He would not replace one unjust system with another. The list of 70 layoffs disappeared. Ayesha returned as quality manager, received the pay she had lost, and gained authority to stop shipments without commercial approval. Renee became interim CFO. Evan received protection from retaliation, but no one called him the hero. At an all-company meeting, he admitted that his silence had allowed Claire to place his name over work done by Malcolm and Ayesha. Maya declined an executive role. She agreed to serve for 6 months on an independent oversight panel with the right to publish findings without CEO approval. Keystone changed the rules that had allowed bias to hide inside vague language. Every conduct note now had to quote words, name actions, and include a date. Disciplinary reviews required comparison with similar cases. Safety complaints could not be closed by the leader whose decision was being challenged. Vendors had to disclose ownership and family ties. Employees who reported safety or discrimination received protection from demotion and unsupported file changes. The board added an ethics observer elected by employees. The history display changed too. Malcolm refused a wall built around his face. Danielle Ellis's name returned beside the original drawings. The display named the first technicians, workers who kept Keystone alive during hard years, and those who spoke when standards slipped. Danielle's drafting table came out of storage and moved into the training center. Her tolerance notebook rested beside the worn red grease pencil. A small plaque read, "A standard matters only when it applies to everyone." The board asked Malcolm to return as permanent CEO. He agreed to serve as executive chair for 9 months, long enough to stabilize operations, complete product testing, choose a new CEO openly, and keep the reforms alive after public attention faded. Responsible power, he had learned, also knew when to limit itself. After the investigation closed, Malcolm and Maya visited the old rail warehouse where Keystone had begun. The building had become a community training center. Together, they cleaned Danielle's drafting table and tightened the loose hardware beneath it. Maya ran a cloth across the scarred surface. "I never needed your company," she said. Malcolm kept working. "I know." She watched him. "I needed to know that the next time someone stands alone, you will not call your silence patience." Malcolm stopped. "I will not disappear again." Maya did not forgive him in one gesture. She handed him Danielle's red grease pencil. They placed it beside the notebook. Malcolm had stopped the sale because he controlled 58% of the vote. That did not make him right. The altered report, the money trail, the written lies, and the people judged by two standards made the case. No one should need shares, wealth, or a hidden title to be heard. Respect should come before revelation. If this story stayed with you, like the video and subscribe for more stories where the truth refuses to stay buried. Which moment affected you most, and where are you watching from? Share it in the comments.